There haven't been as many games with an intriguing localization success story as that of Xenoblade Chronicles. The massive open-world RPG had once experienced difficulty making it to American shores while releasing in Asia and Europe, despite the former region marking a good percentage of the game's target audience. However, after a very successful fan-led campaign to bring it to all corners of the world, Xenoblade Chronicles was met with acclaim across the board and has since seen multiple reprints on Wii and even a re-release on the new Nintendo 3DS. Fast forward almost a decade, and developers Monolith Soft have once again retread old ground, but this time with a new coat of paint and a few extras along the way. While it's an excellent proposition for those experiencing Xenoblade Chronicles for the first time, we'll also be framing this review in mind for those who are considering a revisit. In any case, welcome to Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition on Nintendo Switch. Long ago, two warring titans known as the Bionis and the Mechonis defeat each other simultaneously in battle, with their stationary corpses eventually producing life in which every part of their body houses ecosystems, sprawling seas, and races of beings. It's not long until you're thrust into the plight of the Homs race, in the perspective of Shulk, a curious researcher who dedicates his life into studying a mysterious blade known as the Monado. Being the only known weapon capable of fighting the Mechon, a mechanical race residing within Mechonis who have been at war with organic inhabitants of the Bionis for years. After sustaining a traumatic Mechon attack on his colony residing near the Bionis leg, Shulk sets off on a journey to seek revenge and unlock the secrets of the Monado's power. While that is but a simple summary of the story, the real hook of Xenoblade Chronicles comes from the concept and execution of its aesthetic elements. A revenge story and a mysterious godly weapon may seem like pretty commonplace devices within the fantasy genre, but the heavy notes of science fiction and unique setting really help set Xenoblade Chronicles from the rest of the pack. The environments being parts of gigantic titan corpses frozen in place really nails the wide sprawling epic it intends to be, which makes it all the more impressive that this game had once been able to run on a measly Nintendo Wii console. Now with the extra grunt of the Switch, Definitive Edition sports better environmental textures, lighting, and most character models have received a decent boost in polygon count, to the point that most major characters have been reworked completely. As far as resolution goes, it all depends on how you're primarily playing it. Definitive Edition appears to run around 720p while in docked mode, with handheld mode around 540p, and clever use of some filters to help clear the image a bit. For those who have played Xenoblade Chronicles 2, expect performance and appearance to be very similar. While the general draw distance of the massive environments is as impressive as it was in the original game, a lot of the improvements such as grass and fauna have a pretty shallow level of detail, so expect objects in your vicinity to dither in and out quite aggressively if you have your camera zoomed out enough. This is a bit of a disappointment on the technical side of things, considering the Switch is far more powerful than the Wii, and games with similar scope such as The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild do a much better job at hiding most of its hardware limitations and imperfections. Still, we can't really bang on about the resolution too much. While the novelty of having a portable Xenoblade Chronicles has already worn off with the 3DS port and the sequel, it still does enough to provide a better image than Xenoblade Chronicles 3D. Much like the game's previous releases, Xenoblade Chronicles isn't usually defined by sheer graphical fidelity, but more so its commitment to scale, the idea of having substantially large environments to explore that rival that of MMORPGs. As long as you don't care too much about resolution over stable performance, you probably won't pay it too much mind anyway. As for sound design, we're a little bit conflicted. Voice acting is fine as the original cast had returned to re-record dialogue, and for the most part it's great on several levels. The main cast can be delightfully goofy during downtime, and in that same breath, land all of the serious scenes when the need arises. However, the audio mixing still feels a little bit off to the point where most music will drown out dialogue during some of the more critical moments in the story. Additionally, some of the re-recorded music feels a bit superfluous, to the point where some of the original recordings of tracks rate better than the arranged ones. Most of the ambient pieces, particularly Gore Plains and Aerith Sea, maintain the spirit of their original counterparts, while some battle themes lack the impactful percussion and vocals of their original recordings. Thankfully, most of the issues I found could be easily rectified in the config menu, such as changing overworld and battle themes from the original and arranged tracks, while tweaking sound levels to blast mechanical rhythm to your heart's content, so it's not all bad news. Luckily, a lot of the issues stop there, as the gameplay of Xenoblade Chronicles is the reason to overlook absolutely everything that doesn't land properly. Taking very heavy cues from MMORPGs, Definitive Edition continues the trend of role-based combat, meter, and aggro management. The original game's foundations remain untouched for a good reason, whereas the magic lies in the redesign of the game's UI. Definitive Edition tweaks the menu and combat interface to reflect the improvements of Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and yields a sleeker, concise heads-up display that suits both handheld and docked modes. Enemy information, buffs, and HP count are nestled neatly at the top, while your party gauge, party members, and pertinent information are placed to the side. Adjacent to the bottom lies the Arts menu or Battle Palette, where you use skills in between auto attacks to buff party members, inflict status elements on enemies, and manage cooldown. There's no doubt that combat can be quite hectic in any Xenoblade game, and these changes are most certainly welcome so that players can focus heavily on watching their buffs, checking aggro, or engaging in the occasional quicktime event to boost their party gauge. This comes in handy particularly when Shulk receives visions from the Monado mid-combat. These visions will predict an enemy performing a massive attack that can be prevented through swift decision making, aggro pulling, and buffing the party. With a revamped UI and improved menu response time, these sequences are stern but fair to navigate around. The status menu accessible outside of combat received a significant upgrade as well, where equipping items, setting affinity skills, and upgrading arts are all placed in the one menu that loads much quicker than Xenoblade Chronicles' previous iterations. Many elements that made menus fiddly and awkward to navigate have been streamlined appropriately, and unlike Xenoblade Chronicles 2, does a more sufficient job at advising you on how to play the game. Though the comparisons to the sequel don't stop there, Definitive Edition sports some time attack challenges that are accessible throughout the main story questline, where prizes are awarded based on your performance and have both preset and free conditions. They're fun little diversions if you grow weary of the side quests, particularly if you've seen and done everything a certain area has to offer. Another neat little addition for purists is Expert Mode, where the game allows you to hold onto experience received from side quests and landmark discoveries and prompts you to manually level up your party members once they accrue enough backup experience. While this might sound confusing at first, it's particularly wonderful at allowing players to tweak character levels should the main story questline become too easy, too hard, or even to change to the level of a boss enemy in the overworld. For example, if you have a boss enemy that's level 60 and you're level 80, you can bump yourself down to match that level and get the intended difficulty of that particular fight. Casual or first time players might not pay it any mind at first, but it helps create this modular experience to suit all sorts of players, from people who would rather comfortably enjoy the story to those who prefer to challenge themselves. Finally, Definitive Edition sports a brand new Epilog in the form of Xenoblade Chronicles Future Connected. This takes place a year after the events of the base game and aims to provide a slightly different take on the format of Xenoblade's combat. Some major features like the Monado's visions are omitted completely and replaced by additional mechanics to ensure that combat remains tense. For example, the party gauge is replaced by a gauge that, when filled, allows you to call upon Nopon Rangers, who will either cause massive damage to an enemy, heal your party, and more depending on what the situation calls for. I personally prefer the flow of the original game's combat, but Future Connected does a neat enough job at exploring different ways to convey reactive mechanics. As for the story, Future Connected doesn't particularly feel like a beefy enough package to consider narratively significant until the final cutscene. There's a lot of fluff, particularly for an epilogue that lasts only 10 hours, and in many ways it feels like a playable light novel, where events are largely inconsequential. As long as you treat the edition as a complementary experience rather than a massive expansion, you'll at least be able to enjoy unlocking extra features for use in the main game, so it's not all doom and gloom. Though that may very well be the biggest point of contention for post-release, Xenoblade Chronicles has seen multiple reprints over the course of the last 9 years, and Definitive Edition marks the third official release. For many who have the last two releases of Xenoblade Chronicles, the future connected Epilog by itself might not be enough to justify triple dipping. Conversely, if you haven't finished or never played the game before, Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition is an experience that's well worth the price of admission, where the positive tweaks vastly outweigh the technical hiccups. For more reviews, guides, and our full episodes, be sure to like this video and subscribe to us here at youtube.com/NewGamePlusTV. If you're looking to go live with the New Game Plus crew, be sure to check out our weekday streams at twitch.tv/NewGamePlusTV. Thank you very much for watching.